Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week,
you can wake up feeling fantastic and really full of life and energy and enthusiasm. Some days you just wake up and you just hate the world and everything feels wrong, and you can have a really down day, and that is normal.
One of the issues around men's mental health is that it's an end point or it's a conclusion, as opposed to it being a transient part of life.
We all do it, don't we? We all say to someone, "Oh, how are you?" We go, yeah, I'm fine. And then actually, if you stopped and think twice about it, you might realize, well, maybe I'm not fine.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for checking out the programme. And thanks for everyone who downloaded last week's edition of Mental Health Monday. It's some really positive feedback, a lot of shares on that on social media. So maybe that's the first time you've listened to Mental Health Monday. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming to join us. And if you are able to share the fact you listen to Mental Health Monday through whatever social media channels that you use, that's really helpful in terms of spreading the message, getting word out there. We're available on all the regular podcast formats. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can also stream them now as well as download. Now we head into this week's episode amid Movember. That's November with an M at the start. Mustache November, where men are encouraged to grow mustaches to show their solidarity around men's health issues. In years gone by, that might have focused around things like testicular cancer and prostate cancer only. But actually, it's been great to see in recent years. It's actually moved on very much to bring mental health into the same wheelhouse of physical and mental health sitting together. I remember I spoke to Robbie Hunter-Paul in Movember. I was blown away by the fact that he was taking this opportunity to introduce mental health into the conversation. Just a few years later, here we back are on Mental Health Monday, having a much broader conversation around what Movember can be about. We've got somebody who's going to join us on the programme this week who indeed, yes, is growing a moustache for Movember. Ben Channon is his name, and Ben will talk about his own mental health journey. We'll talk about anxiety. We'll talk about being young. We'll talk about burnout. And we'll also talk about Ben's specialist subject, and this is really interesting because he's an architect. Now, he's written a couple of books around designing spaces so that they are beneficial to our sense of well-being and mental health. This idea that there are things that you can do in a building that means when you walk into them, you feel better. And there are people who are aware of the mental health world out there who are actually going about their daily lives, factoring in these things that make our lives better. We've all got into buildings and thought, oh, this is a bit drab, this is a bit dreary, this doesn't make me feel great. And yet there are some simple tricks, and Ben will go into them, that can really change the shape of a space, the feel of a space, the way that we interact with a space and the way it makes us feel. So that's another angle. But we'll also, of course, focus on Ben's personal journey as well from a mental health point of view, because, of course, that's what it's all about on Mental Health Monday, bringing these stories to light, giving people an opportunity to talk about mental health openly, without stigma, and hopefully to open people's minds to a new way of thinking, make people think, never thought of it that way before. Absolutely, it's what we endeavour to do here at Mental Health Monday. Do please share it with your friends on whichever social media channels that you are on. I'm across Facebook, Twitter and Instagram as well. Keep an eye out for Mr. Mick Coyle as my tag for that one there, and do hashtag Mental Health Monday. Now let's have a catch up with Ben, and I started off by first and foremost complimenting him on the fact that even though we spoke right at the start of Movember, he already had a pretty fine moustache.
Yeah, quite a horrible moustache, actually, I think, as well. That's my wife's words anyway. But yeah, absolutely. For me, I wanted to do something slightly different this year and start the month with a full moustache, see how big we can get it. But really, it's more for me about raising awareness of men's health, and particularly men's mental health, having those conversations with people, getting horrible photos of myself on social media from day one, and really making sure everyone kind of understands the importance of mental health, particularly for men. It's something I've been talking about a lot this month.
I think even when Movember started, there was sort of an emphasis around testicular cancer would get mentioned, prostate cancer would get mentioned as well. And in the last few years, it's fair to say that mental health has very much become part of that. And actually, I'm heartened by the fact that actually that mental health conversation is working its way into that general men's health conversation.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that we all need to, I think, as men, be more aware of and more mindful of. My own personal, the reason I'm so motivated about this subject and passionate about it is because I went through my own issues in my mental health when I was in my mid-20s. Basically, I burned myself out at work, just overdid it, was diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder and had to have some therapy and for that. And thankfully came out the other side of it, probably actually, I would say, stronger and more kind of self-aware. But yeah, it was definitely not a conversation that I'd ever really had until that happened to me. And there's so many men out there like that. And I wanted to raise the issue as well this month about suicide in men as well, and how much more prevalent successful suicides are amongst men than women. So completed suicides, just in terms of terminology. But yeah, it's definitely something we need to be switched on to a little bit more, because it does seem to affect us as gender more. And I don't know whether that's because we talk less, maybe, or just because we've grown up in a society where perhaps it's kind of not something we've been taught to engage with. But yeah, definitely a really important issue for men to be thinking about.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that you talk about the fact, an issue that you dealt with in your 20s, almost as if we can talk about, the time you had an illness or the time that you broke a leg and that recovery time. The idea, the normalization of the conversation can be focused around, there was a thing and it was something that I dealt with, and it's probably something which still has certain ramifications in life, but life continues no matter what. And I almost feel like sometimes one of the issues around men's mental health is that it's an end point or it's a conclusion, as opposed to it being a transient part of life and something you will have to deal with at some point, and then you'll have dealt with it, and then maybe you'll have to deal with it again, or maybe you'll have to help somebody else deal with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a slight misconception still among some people that mental health is this thing that it affects some people and it's not something they'll think about. And to be honest, that's probably the kind of mindset I had growing up, just purely because, as I said, I wasn't very articulate about mental health, and it wasn't something I'd really had much experience talking about. But the important thing to take away is that we all have mental health, every single person. And you can wake up on any given day, if you say, 0 is the worst mental health you can have and 100 is the best, just like physical health, on any given day, it can be, a 40 or a 70. You can wake up feeling fantastic and really full of life and energy and enthusiasm. Some days you just wake up and you just hate the world and everything feels wrong, and you can have a really down day, and that is normal. We do all fluctuate, but it also means that if we're not careful, anyone is sort of at risk potentially of slipping down those numbers and ending up really. It's when it's over a sustained period of time. You've got that sustained low mood or sustained anxious mood over many weeks or months. That's when we need to start really worrying about it and doing something about it. But the best thing to do is to try and prevent that, right? Which is kind of what this whole my Movember thing is about. It's trying to get people to talk about their worries and talk about issues they're having and emotional problems they might be having before it escalates, before it becomes something more serious. Because all the research shows if we can nip things in the bud really early in terms of mental health and deal with them almost at source, then it has a much, it's a much better way of dealing with it than letting it escalate and trying to sort of fix things after something's gone seriously wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, growing a mustache is one of those physical signs that you can show and people can then see, which, of course, a lot of the conversation around mental health is hidden because, it's thoughts that are going, behind someone's eyes that you can't necessarily work out from the outside. When I've spoken about my own mental health journey, Ben, I've spoken a lot about that period in my 20s. And one of the things there around recognizing or spotting that things aren't going so well for you. The issue that I had was that I didn't understand there was a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 100. To me, I thought young adulthood, end of university, getting a new job, first car, moving into a house for the first time away from your parents, but wasn't much fun, wasn't enjoying it, felt completely flat most of the time. I thought that was what life was. Oh, right, this is what life is now. It's a struggle. It's not much fun. I don't get much enjoyment from things because I'm too busy thinking about all these other things. it was a delight to start to hear about the opportunities that come from recognizing an emotion or recognizing a feeling. I just wonder whether or not there was any echoes in your own experiences around that period of time. It's a crucial time. And someone once said to me, if you think it's difficult heading into puberty as a young man, wait until you're heading out of the other side, which really struck me as a really a poignant thing to say. That really struck me as that, yeah, absolutely, because I didn't recognize the world that was in front of me or how I could play a part in it.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. And I was looking at some data actually a couple of weeks ago, which kind of interestingly shows that we kind of tend to get happier and happier as life goes along, which is really interesting. So yeah, I suppose a good message to people who are out there in their 20s or maybe 30s and struggling with things is that, you know, when you look at the happiness scores for people up in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, we often see those scores getting higher and higher. So I definitely agree with you. Particularly your 20s is such a tough time these days for a lot of people, because there is an immense amount of pressure on you. You're being forced to kind of work out very, very quickly who you are, what do you want to do with your life, who do you want to be with, where are you going to live, all these massive decisions that are putting a lot of pressure on you at a time when, I mean, you know, I'm going to be 35 in a few months, and I definitely still feel like I'm working out who I am. I don't know about you, but when people are in their early 20s and they're really being forced to think about all of those big issues, it can feel like a lot of pressure. And as you say, you've got, it's probably one of the times in your life where you're least financially stable. You're probably going on sort of entry-level salaries, no matter what industry you're in, really. And so, yeah, it's definitely a difficult time. And I empathize with a lot of what you said there. And for me, I think it was also interesting hearing you say about learning to recognize your emotions. And that's why when I started doing mindfulness and meditation, which, being kind of like a 20-something-year-old lad who grew up in Devon, that was like a million miles away from what I ever thought I'd find myself doing. But actually, the reason that helped me so much, as well as helping me to slow down my thought processes and just be a bit more reflective, probably take a bit more time away from my phone and computers and all those things as well. But it's that ability to almost step back and look at your emotions kind of almost as an external viewer. And that was one thing I found was so helpful about meditation. Was a really nice analogy I heard, I think, from the guys at Headspace. The way they talk about it is it's almost like your mind becomes, or your consciousness becomes, a kind of clear pool with no ripples on the surface, and you can really look down from above and kind of just see what's going on in there and understand, oh, okay, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling anxious. And actually, when you're able to recognize that, you're able to identify that emotion, and you separate yourself from the emotion as well. It's not that I am angry, it's that I am experiencing anger, or I am experiencing anxiety. And that really helps to just distance yourself from those sometimes unpleasant emotions and make them easier to deal with, for sure.
I would say absolutely. And I think for anyone listening now who's thinking, I can't picture myself on those, the banks of that cool, clear pond barefooted. You don't have to place yourself in there. You can, as you're walking down the street, rather than looking at your phone or concentrating on something else or checking the football scores, you can check in on yourself, can't you? And kind of go, how am I feeling today? What I do, what are my marks out of 10? But I think I feel really angry today. As soon as you acknowledge that in your own head, you go, oh yeah, I feel, why? So you can backtrack emotionally then, can't you? If what was it? Why do I feel like that? And then you can spot those signs, or what you can do is you can go, okay, I recognize and accept that. Now let's see if I can do something that maybe takes me to a slightly different place. And I think that's one of the key things that as men we've not yet learned to do, is to basically go, okay, I'm in this place, so I can get to a different place. I just need to know the things that they are. And that might be to go for a run. It might be to read a book. It might be a meditation session. It might also be a phone call. It may be something else. But we're never told in life to find those things, are we? We just kind of presume that you will pick those things up in life. You'll kind of know what to do. But you've got to teach yourself what to do, haven't you?
Definitely. And everyone is different, as you say. For some people, it might be picking up a guitar. For someone else, it might be, picking up the phone. And actually, on the picking up the phone, that's kind of my big message for people this Movember. The reason I'm posting photos of myself with a mustache everywhere is to say, instead of giving money this month, let's give our time. Let's have a phone call with somebody who's maybe a man who you know has had a difficult year, or they're really kind of flat out working hard at the moment, or maybe they've got other issues that they're dealing with, just someone you think would probably benefit from a phone call, because that whole piece around conversation, the importance and power of just touching in with somebody, touching base, and just checking in that they're okay, really asking them about their emotions, just having that conversation around emotions. Again, that's another way of doing that, sort of bringing someone's attention to, actually, how am I feeling? And we all do it, don't we? We all say to someone, oh, how are you? We go, yeah, I'm fine. And then actually, if you stopped and thought twice about it, you might realize, oh, maybe I'm not fine. And so sometimes, it's about asking them that question again, like, no, really, are you okay? And just really trying to delve beneath that kind of surface level conversation that we all do it. We all have that kind of small talk level of chat, don't we, sometimes? And just the power of actually really having a conversation with someone about how they're doing, it can be enormous.
When you think back to your own experience, particularly around anxiety, is there a way that you could explain that to someone if you're empathizing with someone about their experience, and you maybe spot signs that it might be an anxiety thing? What are those things that are the sort of the triggers or the telltale signs, if you like, that anxiety might be an issue?
Well, yeah, again, it does differ from person to person, but for me personally, it was a few things. Firstly, my sleep is always something that I really need to keep tabs on. And if my sleep starts to go, it's a bit of a vicious cycle. If you sleep worse, then your mental health suffers. If your mental health suffers, you tend to sleep worse. So a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. But certainly I start to notice when my sleep gets worse, then I notice occasionally sort of more anxious feelings creeping back in. But in terms of, there's obviously sort of physical markers as well. So it might be if anxiety is getting really bad, for me, I feel sort of my heart can start to race, or maybe my chest feels tight, start to feel like a little bit more, like breathing's a little bit more difficult. For other people, it can be sort of sweaty palms or tingly fingers, or sort of hair standing up on the back of your neck. Just that feeling of almost, it's going into that fight or flight mode. And what's basically happening to you is your body or your brain is sending a message to your body that something is wrong and there's something you need to be worried about, when often in reality there really isn't. And there's many, many reasons why we suffer from anxiety. But often it's just information overload, or some small thing. You're sort of worrying about some small thing and your brain just kind of escalates it. For me, it was a lot to do with overthinking and getting something in my head sort of stuck on a loop on repeat that I just couldn't get out of there. I couldn't get out of certain cycles of thinking. And as you said, there's things you can do to try and deal with that. And for me, it was about finding those things, whether it was walking or listening to music or playing sport, going to the gym, whatever it was. But still, it did get to a point for me where almost nothing was really helping it. And it was actually quite strange. I was so badly educated and so illiterate on the subject that I didn't really know that what was happening to me was a mental health problem. I just thought I was just really stressed all the time. And I kept getting lots of physical illnesses. So I had this case of tonsillitis that just kept coming back and coming back. I actually had shingles, which is when chickenpox comes back from when you're a kid. All of these sort of strange low-level physical illnesses that just, my body just wasn't able to fight them off properly. And it was basically because all of my emotional, all my energy was going into dealing with this mental health problem. And thankfully I had a really good GP who spotted this and worked it out, and kind of started to ask me questions about my mental health instead of my physical health, and we got to the bottom of it. But it was quite a long process getting there.
I always enjoy hearing someone tell a story about having a conversation with the GP and explaining physical symptoms, and the GP spotting that there might be a mental health issue, because it gives me hope that actually there are plenty of GPs who are alive to this issue and will explore that with a patient who keeps coming back for various different reasons.
Yeah, definitely. And we're seeing more cases of, the NHS becoming more aware and alert to things like social prescribing, and saying, okay, well, rather than give you medication, why don't you try mindfulness, try walking in nature, try all of these different things that actually we know are really, really good for your mental health. And kind of the other part of what I do is all about creating buildings and towns and cities for people that are sort of better for your health and for your mental health. And I think what's great is our understanding of everything that affects our mental health is becoming more developed. We're all becoming better at understanding this subject. I think COVID really helped in a weird way. We all saw from like spending 2 years basically locked in our houses, not able to exercise, how we all experienced how terrible that can make you feel. And people have started, as I said, becoming way more aware that like, oh, actually, how much I exercise impacts my mental health. If I don't open the curtains all day, then that'll affect my mental health. And all of these small things that everyone is definitely waking up to. It's really positive.
That was the thing where because you couldn't do anything or go anywhere, you couldn't ask the question, what have you been up to? So the question everyone asked was, how are you getting on? Which was like the very British way of going, I know you've not really done anything, so is there anything you really want to tell me? But I think in many ways that almost opened that conversation to say, oh yeah, it almost legitimized someone to explore their feelings a little bit more.
Definitely.
It's interesting you mentioned sleep, or there's that. I always think of that. There's a quote in The Lord of the Rings. I don't know if it's in the book but it's certainly in the movie where Frodo says, no, let me get this right. Bilbo says to Frodo, I feel thin, Frodo, like butter spread over too much bread.
Yes.
And it's when he's experiencing some of the ill effects of long life and living with this as sort of terrible burden. And it always strikes me as that I always think now that the first thing I think is how much did I sleep last night, or how much have I been sleeping recently? Because for me, I always find sleep as the great reset. So it gives your brain time to compartmentalize some of the issues that you've been dealing with. I always use the phrase defragment, because it used to be a thing you used to do on a computer to speed it up, because it would put all the files back in the right place. And I always have a thing, particularly when we had children. I got 2 young children, and me and my wife had an agreement where we would say to each other, I just feel tired. Like that was like, rather than expressing anger in it, but we could go, you know what? I just feel tired, which was our way of going, we didn't get enough sleep last night, and we didn't get enough sleep the night before, or the night before that. What I need is a good night's sleep. So everything else is related to that. But we have this, everyone knows you're supposed to get 8 hours sleep. People say it all the time, but it's never prioritized, is it? Like no one ever prioritizes that on top of catching up with friends, or going seeing a movie, or staying up late, because, if you're at a party at 11 o'clock, you bet that party's still going to be great at 3 a.m. Don't leave. What are you leaving for? You can't leave. This party's going to get significantly better over the course. We never prioritize.
No,
as a nation, as a human race, we don't do it.
No, it's true. And you know what? The clocks went back last weekend, and we all got that extra hour in bed. I said to my wife, oh, wouldn't it be great if every day was 25 hours and you could get an extra hour's sleep? She very wisely said to me, no, we wouldn't. We just stay up another hour later. And it's absolutely true. We don't prioritize sleep. And it's strange because it's one of the biggest overall one of the factors that has the biggest overall impact on both our mental health and our physical health. And there is loads of research now, thankfully, being done into what happens if you get less than 6 hours sleep a night, and what are the impacts on your mental health, your physical health. And definitely from speaking to family members and friends who've got young children like yourself, it sounds absolutely brutal. So I don't know how you do it, and I've got all that to look forward to.
Well, and hopefully that time will come your way, and you'll maybe utilize that. I'm just tired as a lie. But yes, equally, we would do the opposite as well. That we would. Former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, people used to celebrate the fact she used to get up at 4 a.m. and I look back at her politically and think maybe if she'd had a bit more sleep, maybe things might have been a little bit different for her, in the way that she saw the world, But we champion him. That's how dedicated they are, and that's how hardworking they are.
And I don't know if you saw Mark Wahlberg. A couple of years ago, Mark Wahlberg shared his daily schedule, and it's like, get up 3 a.m, hit the gym. It's just, and you're completely right. And there's an issue more broadly there culturally that just applies to almost every job. This idea that to be good at your job, to be the top of your field, you have to start early, you have to finish late. You shouldn't take a lunch break. You shouldn't be away from your desk. Having worked in architecture, it's something that I experienced. I've seen it happen at many architectural practices. The idea that you don't go home before the boss leaves, and you should be working through your lunch break to be as efficient as possible. And actually, again, this is somewhere we can look. There's loads of research out there. Once people start doing sort of 50, 60 hour weeks, they might be more productive for the first couple of weeks, but very, very quickly productivity will actually drop off, and it will be worse than if they were just doing 40-hour weeks. And we need breaks. We need, as you said, we need to defragment. We need to kind of reset and reboot our brains. And if we're just working all the time, it's very, very quickly your creativity will suffer, your memory will suffer, response time, everything will start to go out the window. So actually, that whole hare and tortoise thing, slow and steady, lots of regular breaks, but be really productive when you are working. That's a much better way to think about things.
Yeah, and culturally, we've not yet invented the character who at 4:15 packs up the suitcase and goes, the briefcase, and goes, "Well, I've finished. Why have you not?"
I tried to. I read a great book called The Year of Living Danishly. I don't know if you've read that.
I'm aware of the book, but I've not read it.
It's fantastic. I would recommend. Yeah, and the author, she says that in Denmark, if you they tend to basically be like, try and get everyone out of the office by 4:30. The idea being, go on, haven't you got friends? Haven't you got a family or whatever? You should be spending time with those people, not at your desk. And our mentality is, if you stay late, it's because you're a hard worker. Their mentality is, if you stay late, it's because you're maybe either slow or a bit stupid, and you need more time than everyone else to get your job done. So you don't want to be seen staying late because it marks you down as a slow worker.
That's reason 436 to move to Denmark. Let's talk about a couple of books. Happy by Design by Ben Channon, and the new book as well, The Happy Design Toolkit. I'm right to say available now. I like this idea that you have used your own experience, but then you've played it into your professional life, and you've thought about, when you are designing a space, you've thought about how that space makes you feel. What I wanted to ask you about that is, that's obviously what architects have always kind of done. Like, look, right, how will this space work, and how will people feel great, and will that therefore make me a great architect? But how have you focused that sort of mental health and well-being into it, sort of front and center, with a big capital M and a big capital H?
Well, I think, that's definitely true. If you look at why most architects get into the industry, it's because they want to make better places. They want to create great buildings, great cities, great towns, make life better for people through their architecture, right? But unfortunately, what happens, particularly in today's world, is other factors get in the way. And that might be, obviously commercial factors, things getting cost and value engineered down to, the cheapest possible material we can use. It might be down to all of, the many hoops we have to jump through and red tape we have to deal with these days in terms of obviously health and safety and all those other issues. And there's so much for architects to think about. Having done it for 10 years, it's a very challenging profession in terms of you have to become a real jack of all trades. In fact, you have to be more than that. You have to almost be an expert in every area. And that's just not possible. So what I wanted to do was try to make it easier for architects to really focus back on those elements of joy, those things that made buildings wonderful for people, and just try to bring that back into certainly some of the buildings that I was working on, big residential projects where we did have quite commercial clients. And obviously, being developers, their main priority was, of course, the bottom line. It was the spreadsheets and making sure that they were making a profit on these jobs, which obviously is important. Without that, we wouldn't build any new buildings at all, probably. But it shouldn't come at the cost of joy and pleasure. And interestingly,
I was just going to ask you, so in terms of an example, so I'm imagining, you've got like an old warehouse where you design, and you've got a giant foyer, and you install, or you want to design into it like an urban jungle. So when you come in, you're instantly like surrounded by this amazing space. But then the developer goes, actually, in that space, we could just put 3 more blocks of flats in there, and we can sell them and make another 2.5 million quid. Is that the sort of compromise that you're talking about?
Exactly. We would, I've had conversations before where it's things like, okay, can we put in a bigger children's play area, or can we put in a nice gym or a meditation suite, or as you said, there's so many examples of different things you could put in. And it's, well, unfortunately, we need to hit 200 apartments in this building, or we don't make enough money. And unfortunately, I'll have to sell one of my many Maseratis. So it is, sometimes it's hard to have sympathy as an architect when you obviously do see developers making a lot of money and saying we can't put in affordable housing, or we can't put in these lovely things that would really improve people's quality of life, bigger gardens, for example, or even something like larger windows so we can get in more daylight, or higher quality kitchens so it lasts longer. And as a resident, you really feel like you're kind of cared for, and they care about how this place is going to look in 15, 20, or even, heaven forbid, 50 or 100 years. We are lucky in the UK. We've got buildings that have been around for over 1,000 years, but when you look at a lot of new build projects, how many of those are going to be around in even say 100 years? And it becomes then as well, it's not just about caring for communities and caring for people, it's caring about the planet as well. If we build better places, they'll last longer. We don't need to keep rebuilding and using up all the planet's resources. So it definitely is, there's a really strong case for it, but it's just trying to really make the argument that we should be building places that are better for people, and that's why it's so important to have evidence. And that's kind of one of the big things I wanted to do as well, is there's so much research going on in environmental psychology that they can demonstrate, if you use, say, timber over an artificial material like a plastic, it's shown to make people feel calmer and more relaxed, lower our heart rate, lower our blood pressure. So actually, when you go to a client with evidence for that, or something like if you're exposing office workers to more daylight, they get on average 47 minutes more sleep per night. If you start to tell them facts like that, all of a sudden you're building a really strong kind of business case as well for them to build better places. So that evidence is absolutely vital.
Give us an example then of a Ben Channon like touch within a building that you might install or recommend that won't necessarily have, if it's a yoga pod, people go, that's obviously for mental health. But what are those things? You give us an example of things you've done in buildings or you've designed into buildings where you've gone, this is for making people feel something different when they interact with it.
Yeah, I mean, so many examples. A really good example, say, is suggesting someone brings, let's look at nature. And you mentioned walking and having like a big jungle type setup. Really good, because we've got loads of research there around the way that plants can make people feel more positive. But actually, one thing we've recommended is in office spaces, bringing in sort of nature sounds. And there's some fantastic companies out there that, in America, they often use these clever, they're called sound masking systems, where it's kind of a low level white noise that people can't really tell is there. But what it does is effectively kind of means that you have more privacy, because we've all been in an open plan office, and when it's deadly quiet, no one wants to have a conversation. No one wants to talk to each other. And actually that's terrible for, the whole atmosphere of the place. It's terrible for people feel less socially connected. So what we've discovered is, not we, but amazing researchers out there have discovered, if you play low kind of background noise, actually people feel much more comfortable having these kind of conversations, and it's better for business, it's better for everyone's mood. So there's one company that we're using at the moment, or working with at the moment, and they specialize completely in biophilic kind of nature sounds. So they've gone around the world recording these sounds from, it might be a tiny island off the coast of Australia, it might be the jungles of Borneo or the mountains in Switzerland, and really gone out there with incredible high quality microphones, recorded the most amazing sounds, and then kind of built them into these very clever non-repetitive soundscapes, because we're really good at humans as well at like spotting patterns, spotting when things are looping. So they've come up with very clever systems to avoid all of that. And by putting that in place, it's amazing. I've seen the system kind of in operation. You go from this space when you walk in and you've got all these nature sounds playing and everyone's kind of chatting away and it feels really relaxed. If you suddenly switch it off, everyone looks up, looks around, goes, what's going on? Oh, it's so quiet. All of a sudden, everyone stops talking. And it just completely, it's a very small thing. It doesn't have to cost a fortune. It's a case of a bit of software and some speakers, really. But the change that makes to the feeling and the emotions in that space is just absolutely enormous.
I like the idea of, when you go into a building and you go, oh, this is nice. And as just a member of the public, that is probably I'm never going to go, wow, this is, but like, and you sometimes get it going into like a big cathedral, a big space that we kind of go, oh, now, like, oh, this is nice. Like that sort of feeling, which I guess as an architect to witness, that's not the greatest sort of emotion that I've experienced there. But I always used to say, working on the radio, when people used to go, oh, that Mick, yeah, he's all right. That to me was like the best feedback you could ever get, because it kind of goes, yeah, it's fine, because what you've done is you've recognized what I've done or what I am, and you think it's fine and you've understood it and you've kind of go along with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I always say that kind of arrival experience, a hotel is a great example. You've made up your mind whether you like a hotel or you don't like it within about 3 seconds of walking in the door. And what's done that for you? It's the architecture, it's the kind of environment, it's the ambience, it's just the sense of that space. And it's funny that it's much like when they say, don't they, when you go for a job interview, typically they've kind of made their mind up about you before you've even really opened your mouth. And it's exactly the same when you go to a hotel or many kinds of building. Hospitals the same. You walk into A&E and you instantly kind of just hit with a certain mood, depending on how it feels like. And the power of buildings to affect our mood is enormous. It is great that people are definitely becoming more attuned to that, and it's starting to be thought about more. I think it just ties into that whole wider conversation, the fact that people are becoming more emotionally intelligent. We're thinking about our mental health more. Long may it continue. Hopefully we're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. Ben, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you speaking to us. Good luck with the continuing growing mustache. I look forward to what I'll do. I'll put a link to you on our social media feeds as well, so people can follow your posts, particularly the photos up to now, between now and the end of November, and then beyond with the work you do. The Happy Design Toolkit, I'll put a link to that in the write-up to the podcast as well, so people can find out some more information about that, because I think that's a really fascinating sort of new way for people to think about mental health. I always go for mirrors and plants. Mirrors and house plants are a big one for me, because I think they're relatively cheap.
Definitely,
fundamentally change how I've got a spider plant over my right shoulder, by the way, which is the most 1970s thing going. I love it.
They're good for air quality as well. Not all plants are equal when it comes to improving air quality. So spider plant's a good one. But yeah, you make a good point as well. It's not just about what architects are doing. It's things we can all do in our own homes, and we spend a huge amount of time in our homes, more than ever before, of course. And so definitely, there's things we can all do to improve our homes, improve how they make us feel, and just generally improve our mood when we're at home.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining us on Mental Health Monday.
Thanks so much for having me, Mick.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.